So Mandy and I absolutely love to have people come over to our home. Know that at this point in time you have an open invitation to come to our home anytime that you would like. And if you do come over to our house, you're probably going to get a nice, good home-cooked meal. I love to cook, and the only thing better than cooking is cooking for an audience, right? I mean, I like it whenever somebody who's known me for a while finally comes over to my house and eats a meal that I've provided, and they're surprised that I actually know what I'm doing in the kitchen. I did not get this body shape on accident. All right? Fat guys know what we like to eat. So, but we love doing this sort of thing. We do have one rule, however, if you're going to come to our house. One simple rule: please give us at least 1 hour's heads up. And the reason that we ask for that hour's heads up is because sometimes, a lot of times, our house kind of looks like this. And we don't want you to fall into the illusion that, boy, Brennan and Mandy live in a mess, even though we do. And that 1 hour heads up, I mean, that's not enough time to really clean up the whole house, but that's enough for us to gather all this stuff, usually into a laundry basket like this one, and then shove it into another room that we don't let you in when you come over to our house. We want to at least give the illusion that we have most of our stuff put together, even though we don't. It's not like we like living in a messy house, though. Please don't get that misconception. We're not the kind of people who love living in a messy house, but we both work full-time jobs. And our kids are only getting more and more active in school. They're doing more and more stuff. And so oftentimes our days are we get up, we have to hurry up to get the kids up out of bed because they like to sleep late. They're just like their dad that way. We got to rush to get them ready. We got to get them out of the house, get them to the bus. I got to come home, and I'm trying to get ready for my morning to shower and brush my teeth and do all the fun stuff. And this beard takes a while to get ready. I know it doesn't look like I do a lot to it, but man, if you knew the work that went into this magnificence. But then we go to work, we kind of do all the stuff that work has to do, and then once work is over, we got to go get the kids and run them to a practice or to piano lessons or to any of the other social things that they're doing. And then we got to hurry up and get home and get dinner on the table because they like to eat for some reason. I don't know why kids need to eat all the time, but we got to get that on there. And then by the time we finally get them ready for bed, I'm just exhausted. And even just the idea of folding the laundry that's been sitting on the couch for 4 days, it just wears me out. And so instead, I don't. I allow myself to sit there, usually until I'm starting to fall asleep into my chair. About 9:15, I have to start my usual nightly routine of telling Mandy that she needs to wake up and go to bed because she's turned into a pumpkin on our couch. Eventually, though, it kind of reaches the point where I get tired of the mess, where I kind of reach that level of frustration, and it seems like it's too big and too much, and so I need to do something about it, right? And so oftentimes I'll use part of my day off to kind of pick up the house a little bit. But sometimes it gets to the point where it's so messed up, where it's so disheveled and messy that I'm trying to make my goals pretty small here. Let's just get the dishes done. Let's try to get the table somewhat clear to where there's enough space for the four of us to eat there if we want to. Let's do what we can to do that. This mess is not just in our living room, it is everywhere at a certain point. Again, I might get those dishes done, I might get the table cleared off a little bit, but eventually I find myself completely overwhelmed. I find myself to the point where it's like, no matter how much I try to do, I'm moving one mess off to the side to take care of another mess. And all I'm doing is creating more mess and more clutter and more chaos over here instead of dealing with all of it. And I reach that point where I'm so overwhelmed that I just stop. And I just kind of live with it. I just allow it to get better, to get more worse, because messes never stay the same, do they? Dishes continue to pile up, and dirty clothes continue to get happening, no matter how much I tell my children to please pick up their dirty clothes. Or myself. It just continues to grow, and all that does is lead to more mess and more chaos and more confusion, and it gets to the point I can't handle it anymore. I need help. I need somebody who's willing to step in and help me sort this out and help me clear out the clutter and clear out the mess. There's got to be a better way. For a lot of us, our lives are kind of a mess. Maybe not a literal mess. I mean, I don't know what your house looks like. Maybe it looks a lot like this, and you walked in this morning and felt like you were home. But for a lot of us, our lives just kind of feel like a mess. It's cluttered. It's chaotic. We're always chasing after ourselves, trying to figure out how do we do the next thing? How do we navigate the next phase of life? How do we figure out? How do we handle our finances? How do we just live in an ever-increasingly world where it's more and more difficult to live? How do we continue to function in the mess of all this? And then there's even that notion of all of us do things that we know we shouldn't. Right? We're not proud of that. I don't think anybody in here is coming in here today to display their sin for the rest of us to see. We know we shouldn't do it, but there's something about it that just leads us to continue to do that. And we know we ought to stop, but we don't, and so the mess just gets worse. Oh, but man, we do a really good job of hiding that mess, don't we? We become really adept at throwing it all into a laundry basket and tucking it away in a room. We come to places like this and we slap on a big old smile on our face that says, everything's fine. I know what's going on. I'm happy, I'm content, when the reality is just below the surface. If somebody were to open that door, they'd see exactly what a mess it really is. They'd see exactly how cluttered and chaotic and crazy and, let's be honest, gross that our lives really are sometimes. We don't want to have to live with that, and so sometimes we actually try to. We make those resolutions to ourselves, not necessarily at New Year's, but throughout our lives, like, I'm going to change this around. And so we read the self-help books. We listen to the time management podcasts. We do all the stuff that we know to do to try to fix it. But the more we try to fix it, it just seems like the messier it gets. All we're doing is we're clearing up one area, but we're moving the stuff that's over there and making a bigger mess over here. To the point that we get overwhelmed. We don't know what to do anymore. But just to do our best to try to keep it hidden. Even though we know there has to be a better way. The Gospel of John tells us a really great story. And if you got a Bible, I want you to turn to John chapter 4, if you would, please. And just kind of, again, keep your thumb there. Because we're going to reference it several times today. It's the Gospel of John chapter 4. It's a fantastic story. It's likely one that you're familiar with. I'll be honest, I had a hard time this week trying to remember, have I preached on this particular text already? But I know it's not Matthew, so there's that. Mandy's happy now. So when we got home last Sunday, she finally just looked at me and said, "Are you done with Matthew now?" Never. But anyway, but the Gospel of John tells us this really great story, and we're going to talk about it a few different times. Now, we are seeing Jesus and his disciples. They are traveling from Judea to Galilee. They're heading to a different part of the nation of Israel. And in between, we've talked about this before, but in between the nation of Judea and Galilee, there was this patch of land. And this particular patch of land was called Samaria. And what you need to understand is after a lot of years of different people coming into this land of Samaria, they had begun to separate themselves from the rest of the Jewish nation. They were starting to believe into some of the pagan rituals were starting to get meshed into what the Israelite faith teaches. And because of that, the true-blooded Jews, if you want to use that phrase, or those who were very dedicated to the actual true Jewish faith, they did everything they could to segregate themselves from that. Right, we've heard the story of the Good Samaritan. We understand that that's an unusual thing, but to understand the culture and context of all of this, we need to understand that Jews did everything they could to not associate with Samaritans. To be seen in public with a Samaritan was considered a mark of shame. To associate yourself in any way with Samaritans, with the exception of doing business with them, was a huge scandal for you. Jewish people did not like Samaritans, to the extent that if somebody needed to go from Judea to Galilee or vice versa, most of the time they'd walk around it. Understand here, doing that sort of thing, you're tacking on not just a few minutes or a few hours, you're tacking sometimes days onto your journey. I don't know about you, whenever I'm traveling somewhere, I want to get there as fast as I humanly can. Right? If I could somehow afford my own plane just so I wouldn't have to drive places because it would get me there faster, I still wouldn't do it. I don't like planes. I'm very tall, and plane seats are not made for tall people. But I do whatever I can to get there as fast as I can. I don't like to make stops. We had to take the girls back to Illinois this weekend for an orthodontist appointment. And if I could teleport there, I would have teleported there. Because it's just, I want to get there as fast as humanly possible. At one point, Robin said, I need to go to the bathroom. And I said, well, we'll just play on your screen and we'll stop whenever we can. And I may or may not have passed a couple of stops. She just now realized it. Anyway. But I want to get there as fast as I can. I can't imagine the concept of adding on more time into the travel distance. And yet, that is the level of hatred that Jews had for Samaritans. That to avoid them entirely, they will willingly tack on days onto a journey just so they're not associated with them. That is a level of hatred. And so it makes John chapter 4, specifically verse 4, it makes it stand out like a sore thumb. John 4 verse 4 says this: He had to travel through Samaria. Had is an awfully strong word, isn't it? Right? You have to pay your taxes. By the way, if you haven't done that, that deadline's coming up pretty quick. Most of us have to go to work in the morning. Usually the term have to or had implies that there was no other options. Right? Jesus had options. I sincerely doubt there's a ton of road construction going on in first century Israel. I can't help but, when you walk everywhere, everywhere is a road. So there were other alternative routes, even if for some reason it was closed down, or even if it was dangerous to go down that particular path. There are still other ways to do it, but it says he had to go through Samaria. Interesting. As they're traveling through Samaria, they come across the well of Jacob. And it's at this particular point that Jesus decides he's going to rest, right? They've been walking for a while. They've been traveling, and they're getting kind of tired. And it's about noon, according to what John has to say. And so they're probably getting a little hungry for lunch. And so Jesus kind of comes to a stop around this well, and he sends his disciples on into town. He says, you guys go on ahead, go get us some food, go hit up Jimmy John's or whatever and get us some sandwiches. Anybody awake? Cool. He sends them on into town to go get the food, and Jesus decides, I'm going to just hang out here for a little bit. And it's while Jesus is hanging out at this well that something, again, that's interesting takes place. Verse 7, in the first part of it, it says, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Now, let me tell you why this is so interesting. Again, this is about noon. It's the middle of the day. The sun is at its highest peak, right? And a woman has now come to this well to draw water. What this implies is that she's there to get her family's daily supply of water. So that means that one of two things has happened. Either her family has completely gone through their water supply already, or she's just now getting to this. Most of the time in this culture, this context, you would want to go draw water first thing in the morning, and for a few different reasons. One of the most probable ones, if you're going to drink water, does anybody want to drink hot water? It's one of the worst things in the world, right? You want cold water. And there's no refrigerators at this time or no refrigeration system. So if you want water to be cold, you got to go first thing in the morning. Right? That's when it's going to be at its coldest. That's when you're going to be able to get it most refreshing water humanly possible. But also, it was kind of the duties and the responsibilities of all the women of that particular time period to manage their household. And that usually required a lot of water. If you're going to cook food, you're probably going to need some water. If you're going to do the laundry, probably going to need water. If you're going to clean your house, You're going to need water. And so you would go first thing in the morning because every other thing that you had left to do that day hinged on you getting this water, or at least most things that you had to do on that day hinged on getting this water. It's noon. So this woman's either a really late sleeper or there's something deeper at play here. There's something more that's going on below the surface. Most women go at the earliest parts of the day. She came at noon. And it's when she's there that as this woman approaches, Jesus decides to break a whole lot of social norms. Right? Jesus kind of liked doing that, didn't he? He liked to break the kind of usual social structures that we had in place. He said, I don't have time for that, because Jesus decides to break all kinds of social norms, and he does so in the rest of verse 7. It says, "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her. Again, I need you to understand. This is where understanding context as we read through Scripture becomes so very important to us. Because Jewish men did not associate with Samaritans in any way, shape, or form. So Jesus, now talking to this woman who is a Samaritan, is already breaking a social construct. But even deeper than that, in the first century, particularly in this particular area of the world, men did not talk to women who were not their wives, their mothers, or their sisters. It was considered completely taboo. You did not do that sort of thing. Because if they saw a man talking with another woman, the implication was they're having an affair. In no way, shape, or form would any man associate with a woman who was not his spouse. And not only that, Jesus is associating with a woman who's not his spouse, and she's a Samaritan. It's more likely that Jesus would have had, as a Jewish man, would have had a conversation with a dog before he had a conversation with this woman. And it immediately stands out to her. She can't believe what has happened. He has broken everything. It shocks her for him to ask for a drink. It says in verse 9, it says this, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" she asked him, for Jews did not associate with Samaritans. She can't believe that he has done this. So either Jesus is really, really thirsty to the point that he is just about to keel over, or he wants to have a conversation with her. She can't understand what's going on here. She responds saying all of this stuff. This is just a unusual reaction of Jesus's. "How can you ask me for a drink?" And Jesus responds in maybe the weirdest way possible. I love it when he does that, by the way. Verse 10 says this, "If you knew the gift of God, and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him, and he would give you living water." I want to remind you, we're at a well here. And Jesus asking this woman to give him a drink implies that he has no way of getting water for himself, right? That seems like a pretty logical conclusion to make here. And so when he asks her for a drink and she brings up the absurdity that he would ask her for a drink, he says, "Well, I can give you living water." It's a weird response, right? And she points it out, so in verses 11 and 12, "Sir," the woman said to him, "you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. So where do you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did all his sons and livestock." You can almost hear the sarcasm in her voice, right? Right, here she is, she's having a conversation with a man who's not her husband, who's Jewish by nature, and she's never had a conversation with a Jewish person, let alone a Jewish man. And I love the idea that her first interaction with him, and she's already getting a little sarcastic with him. "You don't even have a bucket. Are you better than Jacob?" But Jesus goes on. He tells her, "Everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again. In fact, the water I give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life." Jesus promises her that if you come to me for this living water, it's going to be like you never are going to get thirsty again. You're going to find a wellspring that is so deep and so vast that at no point in time are you ever going to need a drink again. In verse 15, her response stands out big time. It says, "Sir," the woman said to him, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty." And don't miss this part. "And come here to draw water." She wants this offer that Jesus is giving her. She wants this idea of being able to never have to come to this well again. She loves this idea that there's going to be a wellspring of water within me, so I'm never going to need water again because I don't want to come here anymore. I don't want to be in this spot, in this place ever again. Something's going on below the surface. There's a chance that there's a mess behind that door that she's trying so desperately to keep hidden. Jesus doesn't tell her no. He doesn't tell her yes. Instead, he says, "Go call your husband." Ooh. Right away, Jesus puts his finger on exactly what's going on here because she responds by saying, I don't have a husband. You can almost sense the tears welling up in her eyes as she has to utter that phrase to him, to this perfect stranger who's just broke all kinds of social norms, asking her for a drink and now offering her living water. And he now says, "Go get your husband." And he doesn't know it, or at least she doesn't think he knows it, but he's just picked at an awfully big scab. He's just opened the doorway where she tries to keep her most private mess. And what Jesus says next has to completely and utterly floor her. Because it says in verse 17, "You have said correctly, I don't have a husband. For you have had 5 husbands. And the man that you currently have is not your husband. What you have said is true." How in the world does this dude know? Right? Again, understand the culture context here. You don't get divorced. You don't get divorced. You only do it if there's no other options, because once a woman particularly is divorced from her husband, she's borderline useless to the rest of the world. She is completely on her own. Her family is not going to welcome her back into her home, more than likely. They're not going to bring her back in with open arms. And this woman has had this 5 different times. 5 different times she has given her whole heart to a man. She has devoted herself to him, saying, "I'm going to treasure you. I'm going to chase after you. I'm going to love you with every fiber of my being." And 5 different times, they told her to get lost. 5 different times. And now she's doing something that you just don't do in this time period. She shacked up with another guy. They're not married, maybe because she doesn't want to. There's a reason why she came at noon. It's likely because that she carries with her a great amount of shame, a great amount of guilt, a great amount of pain. She doesn't want to face the other women of that village. She doesn't want to be there at the daily gathering of water because she doesn't want to hear what they're saying about her behind her back. She doesn't want to be there because the idea of making eye contact with another human being in this place breaks her heart. She doesn't want to be there in any way, shape, or form. And so if this guy is willing to offer her something that's going to create a wellspring within herself to where she never has to come here again, sign me up. Because I can't live like this anymore. The mess is too big. I'm too overwhelmed. I have no idea where to even start with it. This woman's shame is on display, and Jesus knows all about it. Jesus, understand, did not wait for this woman to have her life together. Right? The implication that John gives us in telling us this story is that this woman is why he had to go through Samaria. Her life's a disaster. It's an absolute mess. No matter what she does, it just gets worse, it seems like. And Jesus doesn't wait for her to figure it out. He doesn't wait for her to clean it up or to make it right or to get in the right pathway or all that stuff. He comes anyway. He comes and places himself in her life in the midst of the mess that it is. Like a surprise guest showing up when they don't text you an hour ahead. He just shows up. He points out the mess to her. And more than that, he offers her a helping hand. She is so incredibly moved by this whole interaction with Jesus, by this whole discussion that she winds up having with him. And it actually says in verses 28 and 29, it says, "Then the woman left her water jar, went into town and told the people, 'Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?'" It is so telling that she left the water jar behind. It is so telling that she is so moved by Jesus, that these people, that she was doing everything that she possibly could to avoid. Now she's going in there saying, "Hey, let me show you this guy. He's amazing. He told me everything I've ever done. He stepped into the middle of my mess. This might be the guy that we're looking for." She is so enthralled by one interaction with Jesus, stepping in the middle of the mess of her life. The only thing that she can do is go and tell everybody else about him. Understand, her life is still a mess, right? It didn't magically go away. She didn't have this interaction with Jesus and all of a sudden the mess of her life is suddenly cleared up. But it was a start. It's a process that Jesus is now going to help her with. Knowing him and being around him and having this interaction with him has changed everything for her. Now, for the first time ever, she has hope that this mess that is her life can somehow be changed entirely. I think most of the time, for a lot of us, our lives probably feel a lot like that woman. Maybe not to that level of extreme. Maybe we haven't had to carry the same kind of pain and shame that she did. But let's be real. Our lives are chaotic. They're messy. We make decisions, sometimes daily, that we instantly regret. Right? You ever seen those stickers on the back of somebody's truck that says no regrets? It's the biggest lie of a sticker I've ever seen in my life. I have a million regrets in my own life. I'm guessing that you're probably the same. We want to do everything that we can, to try to keep our mess hidden. To try to display to the world that somehow we don't have any regrets because our lives are perfect, right? I don't know why we feel the need to mask that. Literally, all of us know, right? That every human being you've ever encountered, their life is a mess. If you turn to the person next to you and look them dead in the eyes, their life is a mess. But guess what? So is yours. And yet we try to keep that hidden. We try to put on a front. We try to do everything that we can. And some of us, we live with this misguided notion that because our life is a mess, that God doesn't want anything to do with us. Right? I can't tell you how many people I've heard, if I ask them, "Hey, do you attend a church anywhere? Are you what kind of faith background do you have?" They'll tell me all the time, like, "Well, I want to go to church, or I want to be a part of this, but first I got to stop this. I got some things I got to clear up. I got to get right with God before I can come to church." Right? I've heard that excuse. I'm guessing many of you have probably heard that excuse as well. I don't know where we got this idea. Because in this story and in so many others, we see Jesus interacting with somebody when their life is a mess, when it's an absolute disaster. And he shows up anyway. Because that is the love of God. Understand, this is what separates Christianity, I think, from every other religion that the world has to offer us. In almost every other faith system, you have to be able to clean up your own mess before you can come to God. You have to get rid of your own disaster that you made before you can ever even think about approaching God. And yet in Christianity, God came down to a world full of mess and offered to help us start to clean it up. Understand, our faith is not a magic wand. Right? It's not just one prayer or one baptism or one moment where all of a sudden everything is hunky-dory. I've never used the phrase hunky-dory in a sermon before, but here we are. Our faith is a process. It's understanding that Jesus comes in the midst of our mess and that he's there to help us. We're still going to have to put in some work. But man, a mess, no matter how big, is so much easier to take care of when there's somebody else to help, right? When somebody else is rolling up their sleeve saying, hey, let me help you with this. Jesus knows how screwed up, how messed up, how insane our lives are, and he steps into it anyway. Even to the point that it's like he has to. For some of you in here, though, you've maybe been coming to church for a long time, and your life is still a mess. Can I offer this suggestion to you? Maybe it's because you never actually let Jesus in. Maybe you've kind of kept him at arm's length at all times, and you've never fully had that encounter with him entering your life in the midst of that mess. There's still that part of you that puts up that wall. It does everything. You're saying, yeah, come on in, but you're clinging on to that door handle, holding it shut because you don't want him to come in there. Can I tell you the moment that you let it go, that you let him in, it's a scary moment, but it's also the most freeing moment you'll ever experience. Because his love for you is so great that he doesn't mind the mess. In fact, he's probably going to tell you how much he loves you while he's folding up the laundry and cleaning up the dishes and doing whatever else this metaphor gives you in your mind. Because that's the love that Jesus has. He knows how messed up your house is. He knows how messed up your life is. And he steps in anyway. It's going to take some work. It's going to be a process. But I believe wholeheartedly that even though my life is so chaotic and so messed up and so just dirty, I believe that Jesus is helping me in the cleanup process. That's the beauty of our God. Is that somehow he's able to take all of this and still step in. The Apostle Paul would write in Romans chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, and we'll close out with it. He says, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus, because the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law of sin and death.